And now, live exclusively from Austin, Texas, Byron Reese.
Thank you so much for having me here today. I wish I could be there in person. I know you just came back from lunch, and so I'm going to invite you to sit back, and I want to take you on a journey, a 2 million year journey that starts right here with this tool you see on your screen. That's called a Shulian Hand Axe. That's what they are, and they were crafted by Homo erectus. And erectus lived 2 million years ago to about 100,000 years ago. And these tools came on the scene 2 million years ago, and they vanished 100,000 years ago with Erectus. Erectus was this amazingly successful creature who roamed over half of kind of the world that could have been populated at the time, and left so many of these hand axes scattered all about that they made for 2 million years that you can get one, a pretty good example, on eBay for about $100. So you can buy for $100 an actual tool used 1 million years ago. Now, I want you to think for a minute. Over the course of those 2 million years, the hand axe didn't change. If I were to show you two examples made 1 million years apart and ask you to pick the older one, you probably couldn't do it. And this is really unusual if you think about it, because even though Erectus was all over the world in all these different climates with all these different animals, they made the same hand axe. And it's really remarkable that they didn't change, because if you think about it, they should have. They used this tool for 80,000 generations, like an unfathomably long amount of time. And in all that time, nobody looked at it and said, hey, this thing would be better if. But there's actually something even more interesting about the fact that across 80,000 generations, he's never changed. And that is that, you know how you play the telephone game when you're a kid and you pass the message on, and by the end, it's all garbled? Well, if every Erectus just kind of copied their father or mother's hand axe, generation after generation, they should have strayed by like 2 or 3% each generation. And especially since they were dispersed, they should have gone all weird and crazy, but they didn't. They didn't change at all. And you know what I think this means? I think this means this is not a cultural object. This is a genetic object. Erectus didn't invent this piece of technology any more than a bird invents the nest it nests in, or a beaver invents how to build a dam. And that's why they didn't change. The same way that a bird doesn't change how they build their nest from generation to generation. And if they are in a different area, they still build the same nest. And so Erectus really didn't even know any more about technology or anything like that than a bird or a beaver would have. So, exit Erectus and enter Homo sapiens. Homo sapiens, on the other hand, came on the scene about 250,000 years ago. But there's two separate things you have to keep in mind. One is what we call anatomically modern humans. Those are people who, if you looked at their skeletons, they look just like ours. But then we have this notion of fully modern humans, and those are ones who are cognitively the same as us. I think they came on the scene about 40,000 years ago. And I think you can see it through the cave art. Because if I were to say, hey, imagine the oldest cave art we know of, the oldest times they drew animals or something, what do you suppose it looks like? My guess is you would think, as would I, they're probably like stick figures, right? Like they started with stick figures, and then as the eons progressed, they got better and better. But that isn't what the archaeological record shows. We have hundreds of caves with art. And what happens is you have nothing, 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 then Chauvet. Look at that panel of those horses. This is 35,000 years ago. Look at this bear that they drew on the wall of Chauvet Cave in France. Or these lions. And the thing is the amount of technical mastery they had to execute these. First of all, they were high up, so they had to build scaffolding. And second, they had to prepare kind of their canvas, and they used fat to make paint adhere. But they used a mineral called housemite. And this is how they got their black pigment. Now, the thing about it is, in order to turn this into pigment, you've got to heat it at 1600 degrees, which is very hard to do. You ain't doing that in your campfire. And the closest source to Chauvet of this mineral is 130 miles away. So think about that. They had black, right? They had charcoal in abundance. They could have painted, but it wasn't black enough for them, right? Like they were like, no, we want this rock from 130 miles away that we have to burn at 1600 degrees. And so just out of nowhere, that happened. Then at the same time, we got music. Our oldest musical instruments date to this exact same time, out of the blue. This flute, you can use it to play music that would be recognizable to us today. It uses a scale that both Chopin and Taylor Swift used, two people you seldom hear used in the same paragraph. So memorable music, recognizable music could be played from this. So all of a sudden, we got nothing, and then we got art, amazing art, and technology, and music, and all of the rest. And that, I think, is when we became these fully modern mental humans. I mean, think about how different it is. Erectus used that thing for 80,000 generations. It took us 250 generations to go from the first writing to Lord of the Rings. It took us 125 generations to go from the first coin to our entire financial system that we have today. It took us 3 generations to go from Kitty Hawk to the moon. So just think how different we are and how we came out of nowhere. It wasn't like our technology was getting better and better, and then one day it kind of got, no. It was 80,000 generations, nothing happened, and then all of a sudden, Chauvet. So what happened? I mean, we got bit by a radioactive spider. I mean, that's what happened. Something like that happened. Something that dramatic happened to us. Some mutation in somebody, most likely, gave us this ability. But what is it? Like if you put flesh on it, like, well, what did we learn to do that gave us all those superpowers? And I think it's speech. But here's the thing, it isn't actually speech like this. That isn't how speech got started. It is speech as the essence of thought. We learned to think in speech before we ever vocalized it. And you can kind of know that because you don't have any organs for speech, right? Every speech organ you have is you use for something else. You use your lungs for breathing and your tongue for eating. And we just kind of kludge it together so we can vocalize it. But we thought in speech. And before we could think in speech, we were erectus. I mean, we were a beaver. We couldn't even comprehend the tool we were making. Now, that's going to sound like a lot of speculation, right? Like, how could you know that? How could you know that if we don't have the capacity for speech, that we are kind of in this whole different state? I'm not a big fan of putting words up on slides, but I'm going to on this next slide. It's a quote from Helen Keller. I assume everybody knows the outline of her story. This is her attempting to describe what her life was like before her teacher came. So I'm going to read this. She said, since I had no power of thought, I did not compare one mental state to another. And then when I learned the meaning of I and me, and I found out that I was something, I began to think. Then consciousness first existed. So she says she didn't think before and she didn't even know she was a thing until she was taught that. And then consciousness existed for her. But what is it so much about thought? Like, drill down in on that. Okay, great. We have a language of thought. We can think the way we think. But what is so different about that? And I think it is this. I think is we understand two things that don't actually exist: the future and the past. They don't exist. Like, they're not things that you would expect an animal to know about, but we do. And what it means is that we remember the past. We have episodic memory, and we plan for the future, and our thoughts, they transcend time. And because of that, we have progress. We have progress. Things get better, right? Or they change. At least they change. But I'll say they get better for a moment. And if you think about it, animals, they don't have progress. You would suppose by now dolphins would have, say, invented a telegraph or something, that beavers would have upgraded the dams they were building or something, right? But they don't. They build the same dams they built 1,000 years ago. And just like Erectus made the same hand axe. That was it. So what is the key attribute of progress? You might be tempted to think it's technology, but that's appealing, but that isn't it. Technology is something that comes out of progress, but progress is something very different. I want you to think about this for a moment. For billions of years, there was one place we could write information. That was our DNA. And it took tens of thousands of years to write one piece of data to it. Now, look, it was really reliable. It taught you how to build a hand axe, and you could do that for 2 million years. It taught monarch butterflies where to go and how to get back, all of the rest. So it could encode data, but very slowly, very slowly. But all of a sudden, when we got this faculty of thought, of language that we could think, we learned how to encode data, not in our DNA, but in our brains at a completely different scale, right? So while it may have taken our ancestors 10,000 years to learn, don't eat this berry because it'll poison you, one person could learn that and encode it in everybody else's mental DNA by telling them, by communicating it. And so now all of a sudden, our knowledge could accumulate much faster, not over the course of millions of years, but day by day, it could. And that is the essence of progress. Isaac Newton talked about this. He said that if I see further, it's because I stand on the shoulder of geniuses. And that's it. Every one of us is born into that accumulated heritage, that accumulated knowledge, and we get to pick up from there and we add to it. And that's what animals don't do. And that's, by the way, what explains Moore's Law. Moore's Law is, of course, the observation that the power of computers doubles and doubles and doubles roughly every 2 years. That it took 5,000 years to make the computer that you have. And by some miracle, in 2 years, you'll have one twice as good. And then in 2 years, twice as good and twice as good and twice as good. It's because that computer has millions and millions of accumulated years in it. It's like compounding interest, right? Although when you're doubling every 2 years, that's like 40% annual compounded interest or something, right? And so imagine 40% in compounded interest over the course of eons. We can't really, because our lives don't behave that way. Nothing in our day-to-day life does. There's a thought experiment you may well have heard. I'll be quick with it, but it's about just what a big deal this is. And it's about the invention of the game of chess in India 1,000 years ago. And it was brought to this ruler, and the ruler was said, "Oh, this is great. What would you like for reward?" And the mathematician who created it said, "I'm a humble man. I just want a grain of rice on the first square of this chessboard, and then 2 grains on the next, and then 4, and then 8, and 16. I just want the rice on the 64th square. That's it." And what do you think that is? Like, how much rice do you think that is? And the purpose of the thing is you're going to guess too low. So guess big. Do you think it was, this much rice? Or do you think it was this much rice? In point of fact, it is more rice than has ever been grown in the entire history of the human race. And nobody's mind goes there, does it? Nobody says, "Oh, I suppose that's more rice than we have ever grown." But what does that mean? Like, what does that mean in practical sense? Well, what it means is it took us 3,000 years to go from the abacus to the iPad. And in just 20 years more, we'll have something as far ahead of the iPad as it is ahead of the abacus. Technology's essential characteristic is that it is able to multiply what we are able to do. No matter who you are, if you use technology, it doesn't just give you a little boost. You don't have to know how to use how a cell phone works to use one. And that cell phone probably has tens of millions of years of accumulated knowledge in it. All of that compounding and one person passing it to another, all in parallel, all of that advancing to this device that when you hold it in your hand, you get 30 million years of superpowers. And you get to build on that. You get to take that and do something else with it. I think the easiest way to illustrate that is with this Radio Shack ad, which you probably did not see coming. This ad ran in 1996, very important. Remember the year, 1996. And the punchline of the story is 10 years after this ad ran, your phone did everything in it. It was your multi-thin calculator. It was, you can hear music. It told you time. It was your camcorder and your answering machine and your computer and your telephone and all the rest. And if somebody had told you in 1996, hey, in just 10 years, you're going to carry a supercomputer in your pocket and it's going to be free with a 2-year contract and little kids are going to have them and everybody's going to have them. And there'll be this place where there's 3 million more things it'll do and they're $1 each. And you would say, no, it will not happen like that. It does not. It could not. But of course it did because of the millions of years of accumulated knowledge that came together to make these things. That was then all put to work by the engineers that made the next thing. Now, what's the real big impact of that? Like, what does that mean to us kind of as a species? I think it means this. I think the world is full of two kinds of problems. There are problems whose essential characteristic is they are technical problems. They don't have to exist. They are simply technical problems. And then there are problems where they're not technical. Like there are bad people in the world who have hatred and anger and bigotry and all the rest. But for that first class of problems, problems that are purely technical, we're going to solve them because they have technical solutions. And because we're up there on square 60 of that chessboard where when you double everything, it's big. When we have all this technology that has come to us and we get to take that and move it forward, that's why like we are what we are, because that's what we do. It compounds like that. So what are some examples of these? Well, disease is an easy one, right? I mean, it's just a technical problem. We don't have to have disease in this world. This is smallpox, arguably the worst one ever. And that's just a technical problem, right? I mean, this man, Jenner, he made a vaccine for it before Louis Pasteur was born. And Louis Pasteur's the guy who came up with germ theory. So we could beat the worst disease of all before we even knew germs existed. That's what our accumulated knowledge was able to do then. Or think of polio. It's virtually eliminated. It's as rare as being struck by lightning. And Jonas Salk, he didn't have any technology, right? I mean, he had the accumulated knowledge of thousands of years, but he didn't have a computer or anything like that. What are we going to be able to do? Well, with our technology, we'll deconstruct it, every pathogen to its existential core, and we'll model it on a computer, and we'll use that to try 10,000 cures in a minute. And there are those who believe that if you can hold on 25 more years, you're not going to die because you only age and grow old for 4 reasons that all look like technical reasons. In addition, you're going to live to see the end of hunger. Hunger is a technical problem, right? You don't have to have hungry people in the world. The earth does not strain to feed its people. Already we throw away enough food in this country to feed all the hungry people in the world. But why am I so confident we're going to end hunger? Well, it used to take 90% of our people to grow our food. And now in this country, it takes 4%. In other places, it takes more, but it's falling everywhere. You're going to live to see the end of poverty. Poverty is a technical problem. You don't have to have poor people. This is a bold claim when you think that half of the world still lives on $3 a day or less. But this is probably the easiest case to make. Over the last 120 years, 85% of all economic growth comes from technology. I mean, we know that, I think, right? I don't work harder than my great-grandparents did, but I live a much more lavish life than they do because an hour of my labor just yields so much more than theirs. So imagine when our productivity goes up 1,000-fold. You're going to live to see free or cheap energy. I mean, energy is the most abundant thing in the universe, literally the most abundant thing. And it's just a technical problem how you harvest it. One hurricane has enough energy to power this country for a year. We live on a planet where our oceans conveniently rise and fall every day. And that's just a technical problem, how you harvest it. The core of the earth is as hot as the sun. The surface of the sun hasn't cooled down since the planet was formed. Technical problem. Winds in the upper atmosphere blow at 200 miles an hour. They don't ever stop. Technical problem. And then, of course, the sun. The sun rains down 4 million exajoules a year on this planet. 4 million exajoules. What do you suppose we use? The total energy generation of this entire planet in a year, 500. So 4 million rain down. So what are the consequences of this? Well, I'm going to talk about short-term and longer term. A lot of people think the short-term looks like this. I don't. I think it looks like this. I think we are about to face and are facing a real shortage of humans. It's only going to get more pronounced. And that isn't just kind of a hopeful thing. And let me tell you why I think that. If you had gone back in time 25 years to 96 and took with you the #1 browser of the day, and you showed it to people and you said in 25 years, billions of people are going to use this thing, what do you suppose is going to happen to jobs? Well, if they had been really forward-looking, they would say this will be terrible for jobs. The travel agents are going to get out of business. Stockbrokers are going to lose their jobs. The newspapers are going to fall right and left. The yellow pages, the yellow pages are going to go out of business. It's terrible, terrible. And you know, you would have been right about everything, everything. But what nobody would have said is, oh, well, there's going to be eBay and Etsy and Facebook and Google and Amazon and Twitter and all the rest, right? And that's the problem, is we can all see very clearly what technology is going to destroy, but none of us have the imagination to see what it's going to create. That's why, it was 10 years after the internet before we got the first rideshare company, or the first, well, not quite, but it was years before we got the first rideshare company, or we got the first Airbnb kind of company. So the reason we're going to have a shortage of humans is, again, you can have a piece of technology that took the eons to make, and you can use it and have all of that concentrated power in your hands. And you just think what you can do with that. And so as technology advances, the number of things we're going to be able to take technology and do goes up. There's an infinite number of jobs in the universe, right? Jobs are created instantly when you take something like a lump of clay and you add technology and labor to it and you make a vase. And the difference between what that clay was worth and that vase is worth, that's a wage. And because technology's out there multiplying what we're all able to do, it's the most empowering thing there is. Now, people accuse me of being a little over simplistic and over optimistic about this, because they point out the following. They say, oh, look, that's all well and good, and it's true, but there's a whole range of jobs in the world. There are low-skilled, low-pay jobs, and there's these high-skilled, high-pay jobs. And the challenge is that technology creates new jobs up here. High-pay, high-tech, a geneticist. But what it does is it destroys the jobs down here, like, I don't know, an order taker at a fast food restaurant. And then people ask this question. They say, do you really think that order taker is going to have the skills to be a geneticist or to do the jobs of tomorrow? So what are they going to do? And the answer is no, that isn't how it works at all, right? What happens is a college biology professor gets the geneticist job, and then the high school biology teacher gets hired on at the college, and then the substitute teacher gets hired on at the high school, all the way down the line. The question isn't, can the people who are displaced by technology do the new jobs? The question is, can everybody in this country do a job a little harder than the job they have today? And I think the answer to that is obviously yes. I've spent a lot of time trying to figure out what the half-life of a job is. I think it's 50 years. I think every 50 years we lose half of all of our jobs. And it's been going on for 250 years. And yet we largely maintain full employment because that's what technology does. It's accumulating. It's making stuff at the top and destroying stuff at the bottom, and everybody's riding that wave upward. So, for the longest time, we were only able to write data to our DNA. It's like 4 billion years of history right there. That's slow going. Then all of a sudden, 40, 50,000 years ago, we came along and we could write it in our heads and spread our mutations around, our favorable mutations. We told them to each other. Then, and that got us. I mean, that was the big one. But then we got writing. And that was a whole nother one, right? Because now all of a sudden you could read. I mean, your thoughts could exist in multiple places and they could endure past your own death. And so that really, really supercharged our ability to accumulate knowledge, to have this progress, to connect the future and the past. But now we live in the digital age and we have a technology called artificial intelligence. That's a whole different thing, right? Now, the problem with artificial intelligence as a term is it means two things. It means two unrelated things. It means like the way biweekly means twice a week or every other week, like pick a lane word, but no, it doesn't. It means these two separate things. And this is really problematic because in casual conversation and in the media, they get conflated. So we say things like, this product uses AI. And then certain people say, AI may take over the world and enslave us all. And so when you hear about your spam filter, which uses AI, you start thinking maybe I got to keep an eye on it but these are unrelated things. I know most of you in the audience know this, but I want to articulate it because which of the following two things happen is pretty much the big question for our future. So let's just unpack it for just a moment. The first AI, this product uses AI, is what we know how to do now. It's machine learning, or we call it narrow AI. We use computers to solve one problem. They learn to do one thing, like identify cats. And it actually isn't a very smart technology. What it does is you give it a bunch of cats, and it slices them up into these tiny little groups of 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 little pixels. And it says all those are cats. And then it takes a bunch of things that aren't cats and slices them up and says, none of those are cats. And then you feed it new things. It slices them up and it tries to see where it can match more with the cats or they're not cats. And every guess is probably about 50.001% right. But it works harder, not smarter. So it does that a billion times, and all of a sudden it gets really good at picking cats out. But it's never looking at it going, well, it's got pointy ears and whiskers. I'm going to say it's a cat. Like, doing nothing like that. So it's not a terribly, it's a straightforward technology. It's what we know how to do now. And it's what most money in AI goes into. But there's this other technology called general artificial intelligence. This is the one where they say, may take over the world and all of that. And this is a hypothetical technology. I would say everybody agrees we don't know how to make it. I would say about 10 groups that I know of are trying to. But it's a machine that can do what you and I can do. It's creative and it can teach itself new things. It can learn new things. I used to host this podcast on artificial intelligence, and I had all the luminaries on it. And I would always ask them, like, do you believe general intelligence is possible? And I asked 100 guests, and 97 said yes. And then I would say, well, when do you think we're going to get it? And they would give me answers between 5 and 500 years. They clustered around 20 years, but it's been 20 years out for 70 years now. And then I would say, well, we don't know how to build it, so why are you so confident we will build it? And I always got 97 of the same basic answer, which is, well, we're machines with general intelligence. Therefore, machines can have general intelligence. So that entire idea is based on this notion that people are machines. And if that is true, then someday we'll build a mechanical mind. It's interesting because when I give speeches on this topic and ask for a show of hands, do you believe people are machines? I get about 15% of people raise their hand. It's an amazing disconnect, an amazing disconnect. I do want to tell this thought experiment, and this is the last I'll say on the topic, because then I want to move into kind of the future. There's a thought experiment about this question of general AI, and it's called the Chinese room problem. And the setup is there's this room that's got all these books in it, lots of books, special books. And it has, and there's a person in the room called the librarian, and the librarian speaks no Chinese, none. And outside of the room, there are Chinese speakers. And the Chinese speakers write questions in Chinese, and they slide them under the door, and the librarian picks them up and finds the book that has the first character on the spine and pulls that book down and leafs through it to find the second character. And then that directs the librarian to another book where they pull that down and look up the next character, and they keep doing that until they get to the last character, and it says, write this down. And so the librarian copies these characters that are indecipherable, slides them under the door. The Chinese speaker outside picks them up, reads it, and it is perfect. It is a perfect response in Chinese. Now, the question is, the setup, does the librarian understand Chinese? Some people would say, look, if you're conversing with it in Chinese, but you say it does not understand Chinese, that's ridiculous. This room, of course, is a computer, and it passes the Turing test. The Chinese speakers outside are convinced there's a Chinese speaker in there. But other people would look at it and say, no, there's nothing in there that understands anything. It's just a program. So that brings us to where we are now, because we're going to deploy this technology where the next generation is going. You know, if the shift from writing into DNA to writing in our minds to writing into paper to doing it at infinitely fast speeds, what that does to that curve, it means we're going to be able to do what the Greeks hoped to do when they said they wanted to tame the savage heart of man and make gentle the life of this world. We have everything we need to build a utopia. But the reason we haven't is because the story of our species is that there's never been enough stuff, never been enough for everybody, not enough food, not enough leisure. And so some people got it and some people didn't. And then we learned this trick where we learned how to multiply, to accumulate our knowledge, and we overcame that. The utopias we used to dream about building were things where men and women had legal equality, or people got to select their own rulers instead of having monarchies, or people could choose a religion of their choice. And those were utopian ideals that we are on our way to achieving. And we have a whole nother list for ours, what we want to do. And so we're going to be the generation that I think gets to deliver on this, not because we're any better, just we were born with all of that accumulation, and we can take it all, and we benefit from the 30 million person years of technology embodied in that device. And so we're going to be the ones that do it. And so is this a happily ever story, a happily ever after story? Maybe not. Maybe not. Maybe we are too smart for our own good, literally. Nature is full of things held in check and balance. And we are so preeminent. We're so preeminent on this planet. There's nothing that does that to us, right? I mean, think about what happened when we got bit by the spider. The first thing that happened is all the other hominids disappeared from the archaeological record. They all went away. I think it's reasonable. I mean, they were outclassed. If Erectus was just building this one tool that it didn't even really know how to build, like that was it. Like, they didn't have any chance. And then next were the megafauna. They all vanished because, and then, one very plausible explanation for the Fermi paradox. Why aren't there aliens everywhere? I mean, the idea is, look, all those planets, they all should have had these intelligent, or many should have intelligent races, and they would have built these probes that would go from planet to planet and land, and they would replicate themselves, and they would zip around and find other planets. And, we should be looking up there and seeing zip, 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 all these things just flying around, and nothing. I mean, we see nothing. And so one theory is every now and then something like us happens. It so outpaces everything else that, well, we basically destroy ourselves. This is a photograph. You probably know. It's called the pale blue dot, and it was taken by the Voyager probe at the suggestion of Carl Sagan. As it was leaving the solar system, he got NASA to ask them to turn it around and take this one final photo of Earth. That's us. That's everything. It has no scientific value whatsoever, but it has a lot of emotional value. That's it. That's our whole story. He said in 1966, that civilizations probably come to a crossroad where they get to decide, they overcome their destructive tendencies, and they join the billion-year club where they go on and live. But most don't. Most go the other path. And we really are at that fork. Like, we are at that place where we have accumulated this knowledge and are growing it so rapidly that it's this race between our ability to use it correctly, to get into the billion-year club or not. I thought long and hard about why, like, what determines which of those two paths we do. Some people say, look, if we keep growing technology fast enough, maybe we have crossed this threshold. We're trying to bring the megafauna back now. And maybe we can. But I don't know the answer. I don't know what determines which of those two paths we go down. But I will close with a quote about that from Carl Sagan, which is, he says, in all our obscurity and all this vastness, there is no hint that help will come from elsewhere to save us from ourselves. It is up to us. Thank you very much.
Woo! Byron, do you have time for 2 questions? And if you have questions for Byron, we have to use these mics so he can hear you. So if you're up for it, come on up. Otherwise, we will jump in. But you got time for questions, Byron? You good?
I am good.
You are good, man. That was awesome. Is that John Feldman? You're in? All right, hop in. Are you asking a question?
Hey, Byron, thanks a lot for that. You mentioned that we're about to face a more serious shortage of humans in the job market. And I'm trying to put the dots together. So could you tell us a little bit about that chain where the knowledge and whatnot and AI are going to come together? Why are we going to face an even more serious shortage? Like, I think I know why, but I want to ask. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Look, of course, nobody knows. But if we can all agree that the number of things we can do with technology, the number of ways we can add value is growing. So the population of the Earth isn't, right? I mean, it is, but just holding that static, the number of financial opportunities, the number of employment opportunities grows. If you lived in a town 100 years ago and the town had one industry, had a sewer pipe maker, what agency did you have in your life? Like, what could you do other than farm or work at the sewer pipe factory? What could that same person do now when they have technology that will give them the powers that were hitherto attributed to gods? They can just take something that's virtually free and they can sell to the whole world, or they can work anywhere. You can make up a new job. Just, I'm going to be an influencer. Like, what is that? I'm going to be a web designer. Oh, I know. I'm going to be an Uber driver who gives people tours of my town when they come to town. I think about, well, anyway, that's what I would say. So I just think it's mathematical. The number of opportunities grows, and the number of business ideas that people could come up with today, I mean, they're unlimited, and there just aren't enough people. You can take AI as an example. If there was no more development in AI, nothing, we probably have 30 years worth of work to do just to implement what we know. But I don't think that's unique to tech. I think we can take all this technology that we have and do all of these things that we weren't able to before. And I'll say one final thing, which is, if there's a job that a machine can do and you get a person to do that, there's a word for that, and that word is dehumanizing. I mean, what you say to that person is, look, a machine could do this, but I don't have the machine. I just need you to be a machine. And so don't be a human. I just need a machine. So you think about those people that like wash the windows on the skyscrapers. One dies every day on average, by the way. You know, a machine should be doing that. Any job that a person, you want people to do things only people can do. And I think, luckily, that everybody is capable of more. So.
All right, let's give it up for Byron Reese. Thank you.